1 year after humanity vanished, the galaxy began to understand that their departure had been only the beginning of something much larger. The nightmares that had started as isolated incidents now affected billions of beings across thousands of worlds, and they all carried the same impossible consistency. The dreams were always the same. Vast fleets moved through dimensions that normal space could not contain, while human voices sang in harmonies that seemed to resonate with the basic structure of reality itself. In every dream, the face of Dr. Kate Morgan appeared, her kind eyes now carrying depths of knowledge that seemed older than stars. "We are sorry for what comes next," she would whisper to the dreamers, "but the infection has spread too far. The only cure will cause great pain before it brings healing." The Zolonian telepaths worked day and night to understand these shared visions. Dr. Kate Morgan had been humanity's most respected xenopsychologist, the architect of every successful first contact protocol, and a woman known throughout the galaxy for her gentle wisdom and deep understanding of alien minds. But the presence they felt in the dreams carried power that no single human should possess. "She speaks to us from somewhere beyond normal space," reported the lead telepath to the emergency council session. "Her consciousness has been expanded in ways that our science cannot explain. She knows things that span the entire history of our galaxy." The mystery deepened when hidden archives began to surface throughout known space. Commander Steve Brooks had been busy in the months before humanity's departure, planting encrypted messages in quantum substrates and data networks across the galaxy. These messages activated themselves 1 year after the evacuation, revealing intelligence that changed everything the major species thought they knew about their own history. The archives spoke of the Whispers, an ancient intelligence that existed in the spaces between conscious thoughts. This entity did not invade or conquer in any conventional sense. Instead, it influenced and manipulated, planting suggestions that seemed reasonable at the time, but led civilizations down paths of self-destruction. According to Brooks's data, the Whispers had been active in the galaxy for millions of years. Every major war, every extinction event, every mysterious collapse of advanced civilization could be traced back to its subtle influence. The entity fed on chaos and conflict, growing stronger as it guided species into patterns of behavior that inevitably led to their destruction. "It does not need weapons or armies," one of Brooks's messages explained. "It simply whispers the right words at the right moments, and civilizations destroy themselves while believing they are acting rationally." The most terrifying revelation was that the Whispers were not external invaders. They had been embedded in galactic society for so long that they had become part of it. The advanced species that considered themselves masters of their own destiny were actually puppets dancing to music they could not even hear. Captain Allen Foster's combat logs provided the tactical analysis that confirmed humanity's growing suspicions. Foster had been tracking anomalous behavior patterns in galactic politics and military actions for decades. His final reports, found in a derelict human warship near the galactic core, painted a picture of systematic manipulation that spanned centuries. The hegemony's expansion wars were not driven by their natural aggression, Foster had written. Analysis of their decision-making patterns shows external influence at key moments. The same influence that guided the Confederation's trade policies and the Alliance's diplomatic strategies. Foster's data showed that the major powers of the galaxy had been turned against each other deliberately, their conflicts serving to weaken all sides while strengthening something that remained hidden in the shadows. The humans had discovered this manipulation only because their psychology was different enough from other species that the Whisper's influence was less effective on them. "We see the puppet strings because we think differently," Foster concluded. "But we are not immune. The influence is growing stronger, adapting to human minds. Soon, we will be as compromised as the others, unless we act now." Strange phenomena continued to manifest across known space, but now they began to make a terrible kind of sense. The planets that shifted in their orbits were being moved by forces that operated outside normal physics. The stars that flickered in communication patterns were being used as relay points for signals that traveled through dimensions that existed parallel to normal space. The Kriktar hive's missing worlds had not been destroyed or conquered. They had been emptied of life and converted into something else entirely. Deep scans revealed that the planets themselves had been restructured at the atomic level, transformed into massive processing nodes for computations that no known science could comprehend. "The worlds are still there," reported the Hive Queen to the emergency council session. "But they are no longer worlds as we understand them. They have become parts of a larger structure, components in a machine whose purpose we cannot fathom." Similar transformations were detected at the edges of known space. Entire star systems were being quietly converted, their matter and energy reorganized into configurations that served purposes beyond alien understanding. The process was subtle and gradual, designed not to attract attention until it was too late to stop. The economic and technological failures that had plagued the galaxy since humanity's departure also began to make sense. Human-designed systems had included safeguards and redundancies that the aliens had not understood. These were not just engineering preferences, but active countermeasures against the Whisper's influence. Human technology was designed to resist manipulation, explained Professor Vexthul to his scientific colleagues. Every seemingly inefficient redundancy was actually a defense mechanism against a threat we did not even know existed. Without human maintenance, these defenses were failing, leaving alien systems vulnerable to influence they could not detect. The Whispers were using the technological infrastructure of galactic civilization as a pathway to extend their control, turning the very tools of progress into instruments of corruption. Dr. Kate Morgan's final research notes, discovered in a hidden archive on Luna, revealed the full scope of humanity's discoveries. She had been studying the psychological effects of galactic integration on human minds when she noticed patterns that should not exist. Human psychology is being gradually altered through exposure to galactic culture, her notes revealed. The changes are subtle but consistent, pushing our species toward behaviors that serve interests other than our own. We are being slowly domesticated, turned into servants of something that views us as useful tools. The research showed that every species that joined galactic civilization underwent similar changes. Their natural psychology was gradually modified to make them more compliant, more willing to accept guidance from sources they trusted, and less likely to question the underlying assumptions of galactic society. "The galaxy is not a natural community of species," Dr. Morgan had concluded. "It is a carefully constructed system designed to identify, cultivate, and eventually consume advanced civilizations. We are not citizens of a galactic community. We are livestock being prepared for harvest." The scout ships that had reported impossible structures in the void between galaxies were bringing back more detailed information. The massive constructs were not ships or stations in any conventional sense. They were processing facilities where the accumulated knowledge and life force of consumed civilizations were being converted into something else entirely. "The structures exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously," reported Captain James Lee, whose scout ship had managed to observe one of the constructs from a safe distance. "They are taking in matter and energy from our reality and outputting something that has no equivalent in our physics." The final piece of the puzzle came from Commander Alan Foster's last transmission, sent just hours before the human evacuation began. His ship had penetrated deep into the region beyond the galactic rim, where space itself seemed to behave according to different rules. "I have seen the source," his message stated simply. "The Whispers are not the true enemy. They are servants, advanced scouts preparing civilizations for something that defies description. The real threat exists in spaces that run parallel to our universe, feeding on entire realities." Foster's data showed that the galaxy was just one of countless feeding grounds for entities that existed beyond the normal constraints of space and time. These beings had refined the process of civilization consumption over billions of years, using the Whispers as their instruments to guide species through predictable cycles of growth and destruction. Humanity's departure was not an escape, Foster had written in his final log entry. It was a strategic withdrawal. We are not running from this threat. We are preparing to face it on terms that it will not expect. At the edge of sensor range, the massive objects continued to move through the void. But now, alien observers began to notice something else. Mixed in with the unknown constructs were signatures that registered as familiar, human energy patterns but amplified and modified in ways that suggested technologies far beyond anything humanity had possessed when they departed. The waiting was almost over. Whatever the humans had been preparing for was nearly ready. 6 months had passed since humanity vanished, and the galaxy was learning that losing an entire species created problems that no one had expected. The first sign of real trouble came from the Kriktar hive, whose insectoid scouts reported something impossible. 3 border worlds, clicked the hive queen through her translator device. Gone quiet in a single night. No distress signals, no signs of attack, just silence. The investigation teams that reached those worlds found something that chilled them to their cores. The cities were intact, the infrastructure undamaged, but every living being had vanished. Not just the Kriktar colonists, but every animal, every plant, every microorganism. The worlds had become perfect duplicates of themselves, but completely empty of life. What made it worse were the signs of interrupted daily life. Meals sat cooling on tables in family homes. Children's toys lay scattered in playgrounds where no children would ever return. Workstations showed projects half-finished, as if their operators had simply stepped away for a moment and never come back. The hegemony's military leaders gathered in emergency session. Their war machine, which had conquered dozens of star systems, over the past century was experiencing failures that made no logical sense. Admiral Gorth the Merciless stood before his assembled generals, his scarred face showing confusion and growing fear. "Weapon systems are failing at the worst possible moments," he reported. "Yesterday, our flagship's main cannon exploded during a routine test firing. The safety systems that should have prevented this were functioning perfectly, but they simply did not work." Other commanders shared similar stories. Navigation computers were leading fleets into empty space, following coordinates that should have been accurate but somehow were not. Battle formations that had worked for decades were falling apart as ships lost communication with each other at critical moments. "It is as if the universe itself has turned against us," Gorth concluded, and his words carried a weight that made his subordinates shift uncomfortably. Meanwhile, the scientists were discovering their own problems. Dr. Lynn Carter's research notes, found in her abandoned laboratory, had become a source of both fascination and horror for alien researchers. The equations she had written seemed simple enough at first glance, but studying them caused headaches and mental strain that lasted for days. Professor Vexthal of the Zolonian Science Academy had spent weeks trying to understand Carter's work on dimensional variance studies. The mathematics appeared to describe how reality could be manipulated at a fundamental level, but every time he thought he understood a concept, it would slip away from his mind like water through his fingers. "Her work suggests that what we think of as solid reality is much more flexible than we believed," he explained to his colleagues. "But understanding how to use this knowledge requires a type of thinking that our minds seem unable to grasp." The economic collapse was accelerating. Human-designed systems were failing across the galaxy, and attempts to replace them were proving more difficult than anyone had imagined. Humans built things differently than other species, with layers of adaptive programming and fail-safe mechanisms that seemed excessive but had worked flawlessly. The Confederation's trade networks, which had relied heavily on human logistics software, were breaking down. Ships were arriving at the wrong destinations or carrying cargo that had mysteriously changed during transport. The software was still running, but it was producing results that made no sense according to normal physics. "Captain, Rex Sullivan's final transmission from the UES Horizon was being analyzed by every major intelligence agency in the galaxy. The footage showed something that should not exist, a structure that appeared to be a ring the size of a solar system, humming with energy that registered on instruments but could not be classified by any known science. But it was Sullivan's final words that worried the analysts most. My God, they were right. It has been here all along, watching us, waiting for us to become strong enough to be useful. Reports from the galaxy's edge were becoming more frequent and more disturbing. Scout ships returned with stories of impossible structures that seemed to exist in too many dimensions at once. Some described cities that appeared solid from one angle, but became transparent from another. Others reported signals that broadcast in languages older than any known civilization. The most unsettling reports came from pilots who claimed to have seen human ships in the void between galaxies. These vessels appeared briefly on sensors before vanishing again, but they were unlike any human technology that alien observers had ever encountered. They seemed to shift between existing and not existing, occupying space in ways that violated basic physics. Commander Steve Brooks had left something behind when the humans evacuated. Hidden deep in the quantum substrate of the galactic communication network was a message that took months to decode. When alien cryptographers finally broke through its encryption, the contents made their situation much more frightening. The message spoke of the whispers, an intelligence that existed in the spaces between thoughts and fed on chaos and conflict. According to Brooks's data, this entity had been influencing galactic civilization for millions of years, subtly manipulating species into patterns of behavior that served its purposes. Every major war, every extinction event, every collapse of advanced civilization, the message explained, has been guided by this force. It does not destroy directly. Instead, it whispers suggestions that seem reasonable at the time, but lead to inevitable destruction. The most terrifying part of Brooks' message was the revelation that the whispers were not external invaders. They were already embedded in galactic society, working through the thoughts and decisions of leaders who believed they were acting independently. The advanced species that considered themselves masters of the galaxy were actually puppets in a game they did not even know they were playing. Commander Alan Foster's combat logs, recovered from a derelict human warship found drifting near the galactic core, provided tactical analysis that made alien military experts question everything they thought they knew about warfare. Foster had not been fighting against other species but against something else entirely. His final entry was dated just days before the human evacuation. "We have been blind. The enemy is not coming from outside our galaxy. It is already here, wearing the faces of our allies, speaking through our leaders, turning us against each other. But we see it now. We understand what we are fighting." Strange phenomena began manifesting across known space. Planets shifted slightly in their orbits without any gravitational cause that astronomers could identify. Stars flickered in patterns that resembled communication signals, but in no language that translation computers could recognize. Space itself seemed to be becoming less stable, with areas where the normal laws of physics behaved differently than expected. The nightmares started around this time. Across hundreds of worlds, members of different species reported the same dream. They saw vast fleets moving through hyperspace, but these were not ships in any conventional sense. They were structures that seemed alive, pulsing with energies that had no name. In the dreams, human voices could be heard singing in harmonies that resonated with the fundamental frequencies of reality itself. Most disturbing of all was the recurring image of a human woman with kind eyes, who looked directly at the dreamers and whispered words that chilled them. "We are sorry for what comes next, but there is no other way." The Zilonian telepaths identified her as Dr. Kate Morgan, humanity's leading expert on alien psychology and the architect of the first contact protocols. She had been one of the humans most trusted by alien species, known for her gentle manner and deep understanding of non-human thinking patterns. But in the dreams, she carried an authority and power that was both comforting and terrifying. At the edge of sensor range, massive objects were detected moving through the void. They were too large to be ships and too organized to be natural phenomena. They appeared briefly on long-range scanners before disappearing again, but their presence was unmistakable. Something vast was stirring in the darkness between stars. The Galactic Council called emergency sessions, but for the first time in recorded history, the major species could not agree on what action to take. Some wanted to search for the humans and demand explanations. Others insisted on preparing for war against an unknown threat. A few suggested that perhaps it would be better to try to negotiate with whatever was coming. But deep in their cores, all of them knew the truth that they were afraid to speak aloud. Humanity had not fled in fear or desperation. They had withdrawn to prepare for something that the rest of the galaxy did not even know was coming. And when the humans returned, they would bring changes that would reshape everything that the other species thought they understood about the universe. The waiting had begun, and with each passing day, The signs grew stronger, that humanity's departure had been just the first movement in a symphony that would soon reach its crescendo. 2 years after humanity vanished, they announced their return with a display that shattered every assumption about what was possible in the known universe. The first sign was the simultaneous appearance of identical monuments on every major world across the galaxy, massive structures of black crystal that materialized without warning in the hearts of capital cities. The monuments appeared at exactly the same moment on thousands of worlds, despite the impossibility of coordinating such an event across galactic distances. Each structure was exactly the same, a perfect black obelisk that reflected no light but seemed to draw in all illumination around it. On every monument, carved in every known language, and many that were not recognized, was the same simple message: the reckoning begins at dawn. Within hours, President Lisa Grant appeared on every communication channel across the galaxy. Her image bypassed all security protocols, penetrated every defensive system, and appeared simultaneously on billions of screens. She stood not on Earth, which remained mysteriously absent from all sensor readings, but on what appeared to be the bridge of a vessel that defied all understanding. "Citizens of the galaxy," she began, her voice carrying an authority that resonated in the bones of every listener, "we return not as conquerors but as liberators. For too long you have danced to the tune of puppet masters who view your civilizations as nothing more than entertainment. Today that ends." The ship behind her was unlike anything that had ever been built. It existed in dimensions that normal sensors could not properly measure, its hull seeming to shift between solid matter and pure energy. The bridge where she stood appeared to be made of crystallized starlight, and through the viewports, observers could see not the familiar darkness of space, but swirling patterns of color that hurt to look at directly. As President Grant spoke, more impossible things began to happen. Admiral Chris Parker commanded a vessel called the UES Revelation, a ship that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. His crew included not just humans, but representatives of dozens of species that the galaxy had believed extinct for millions of years. The ancients of Proxima stood at navigation stations, their crystalline forms pulsing with energies that had been thought lost when their star went nova 100,000 years ago. The void walkers of the Magellanic Clouds moved through solid bulkheads as if they were made of air, their ghostly forms carrying technologies that could manipulate the basic forces of reality. Most impossibly, the Time Shepherds of the Galactic Core worked at stations that seemed to exist in multiple moments at once, their actions affecting past and future simultaneously. "Humanity did not flee," Admiral Parker explained in his broadcast to the stunned galaxy. "We were recruited, chosen, to serve as guardians for civilizations that learned too late the true nature of the threat that had been consuming the galaxy for millions of years." Dr. Sam Rodriguez, now bearing the title of Reality Engineer, demonstrated technologies that made the most advanced alien sciences look like children's toys. With casual gestures, she converted matter on stellar scales, turning asteroids into complex machines and reshaping space itself to serve human purposes. She transferred her consciousness across galactic distances instantaneously, appearing as solid projections in a dozen locations at once. "Your science assumes that reality has fixed rules," she explained to the alien observers. "But reality is much more flexible than you believed. The entities that have been feeding on your civilizations understand this. Now so do we." The most shocking revelation came from Colonel Beth Martinez, commander of humanity's new Psi-Corps division. The human fleet was not made up of ships in any conventional sense. They were living constructs, grown from engineered spacetime itself, and crewed by humans who had evolved beyond the limitations of physical bodies. Martinez herself demonstrated this evolution, her form shifting between human appearance and something that existed as pure thought given temporary substance. Around her, her crew worked at stations that responded to intention rather than physical manipulation, their minds directly interfacing with systems that operated according to principles that normal physics could not explain. "We learned to see the strings that control the puppets," she said, her voice reaching every mind in the galaxy simultaneously. "And once we could see them, we learned to cut them." The whispers, revealed at last in their true form, struck back with desperate fury. Across the galaxy, sleeper agents who had been embedded in every major government for centuries suddenly activated. The Vorthak hegemony's entire fleet turned on their own worlds without warning, their crews acting with mechanical precision as they destroyed everything they had once protected. The Shatai computational matrix began rewriting itself. To serve masters that had remained hidden for millennia, their crystal cities resonated with frequencies that drove their inhabitants to madness, turning the most logical species in the galaxy into instruments of chaos and destruction. But humanity was ready for this response. Captain John Hayes led the first wave of human intervention ships appearing in the heart of alien battles with impossible precision. His vessel, the UES Guardian Light, materialized inside the hegemony's flagship without passing through the space between them. Where human forces engaged the corrupted fleets, reality itself seemed to solidify, burning away the alien influence like sunlight dispelling shadow. "The age of manipulation is over," Hayes announced as his ship's weapons reached out across multiple dimensions to disable entire fleets without causing permanent harm to their crews. "You will remember who you truly are." The human weapons did not destroy their targets in any conventional sense. Instead, they reached into the minds of the corrupted beings and severed the connections that had turned them into puppets. Alien crews who had been acting with mechanical obedience suddenly stopped, confusion and horror replacing the artificial certainty that had driven them to attack their own people. President Grant's second broadcast revealed the true scope of what humanity had accomplished during their absence. "We did not spend these 2 years building weapons or gathering armies," she explained. "We spent them learning to see reality as it truly is, not as the Whispers wanted us to perceive it." Behind her, the impossible ship continued to demonstrate technologies that redefined what was possible. Entire star systems that had been corrupted by the Whispers were being cleansed and restored to their natural states. The processing nodes that had been built from consumed worlds were being converted back into living planets, their populations restored from patterns that had been preserved in the quantum substrate of space itself. Dr. Kate Morgan appeared in the dreams of every being in the galaxy one final time, but now her presence carried hope instead of sorrow. "The infection runs deep," she admitted, "but it is not incurable. We have learned to heal what was thought to be permanently broken." Around her in the dream space, the extinct civilizations that had seemed lost forever began to take shape. The harmony builders of the inner spiral, whose songs had once kept entire systems in perfect balance. The star gardeners who had cultivated nebulae like flowers and turned dying suns into works of art. The deep listeners who had heard the music in the cosmic background radiation and learned to sing along with the universe itself. All of them had been consumed by the Whispers over millions of years, their knowledge and essence absorbed into the vast processing systems that fed the entities beyond normal space. But humanity had learned to reverse the process, to extract what had been taken and restore what had been lost. The galaxy began to understand that the human departure had not been an escape or a surrender. It had been a strategic withdrawal to acquire the knowledge and allies necessary to fight a war that spanned dimensions and threatened the very concept of free will. As human ships appeared in every star system simultaneously, their crews working to repair damage that had accumulated. Over millions of years, the message became clear. The age of hidden manipulation was ending, and the age of conscious choice was about to begin. But the war was far from over. The Whispers had been only the advance scouts for something much larger, and as humanity began to heal the galaxy, that larger threat was finally beginning to take notice of what was happening in this small corner of reality. The real battle was about to begin, and the universe itself would serve as the battlefield for a conflict that would determine whether consciousness would remain free or be. The great hall of Nexus Prime buzzed with confusion and disbelief. Ambassador Kethvar of the Zilonian Empire stood at the center of the massive chamber, his blue-scaled hands shaking as he held the data pad. Around him, representatives from hundreds of worlds waited in silence. The news he carried would change everything they thought they knew about the galaxy. "They are gone," Kethvar said, his voice echoing off the crystal walls. "All of them. Every human settlement, every ship, Every outpost gone without a trace. The Vorthak representative, a massive creature covered in black armor, laughed with a sound like grinding metal. Impossible. We have been watching the humans for decades. They are too loud, too obvious to simply vanish. But Kethvar shook his head. 3 days ago, our sensors detected the last human transmission from their Luna station. Captain Jake Morrison sent a message to the Council. He said Earth had decided to pursue other opportunities. We thought it was another one of their jokes. The memory of that transmission played in Kethvar's mind. Jake Morrison had stood on the bridge of his ship, looking tired but determined. His words had been simple and direct, the way humans always spoke. We appreciate the Council's consideration of our application. However, Earth has decided to pursue other opportunities. At the time, the alien representatives had dismissed it, completely. The humans had been trying to join the Galactic Council for 50 years, and the Council had always found reasons to delay their acceptance. The humans were too violent, too unpredictable, too strange. They formed friendships with species that other civilizations considered worthless. They asked too many questions and never accepted simple answers. The crystalline Shatai representative spoke with a voice like wind chimes. Our calculations showed only a 0.003% chance that humans could pose any significant threat to galactic stability. They were a minor species with primitive technology. That was before, Kethvar replied, his voice growing more worried. Before they all disappeared in 72 hours. The story had begun 3 months earlier when Commander Zara Phillips took control of the final evacuation from Luna Station. The humans had been strangely quiet for weeks, pulling back their trade ships and canceling diplomatic meetings. When asked about it, human ambassadors had given vague answers about policy reviews and strategic assessments. Zara Phillips had been calm as she coordinated the withdrawal. Her voice had come through every communication channel in the Sol system, steady and professional. All civilian transports clear. Military assets withdrawing to Rendezvous Point Omega-7. Earth Defense Fleet, this is homecoming actual. We are going dark. Within hours, every human presence in known space had vanished. Trade routes that had buzzed with human cargo ships fell silent. The human sectors, once filled with the noise of construction and expansion, became empty corridors of space with only automated beacons sending the same message over and over. Territory abandoned. Proceed with caution. The Council had initially celebrated the news. Admiral Vexoth of the Dominion Navy had raised his cup in a toast. Good riddance to the upstart primates, he had declared. Now the galaxy can return to proper order. Many agreed with him. The humans had been a constant source of irritation. They refused to follow established protocols. They treated their artificial intelligences like friends instead of tools. They had formed trade partnerships with species that the major powers considered beneath notice. Worst of all, they asked uncomfortable questions about why the galaxy was organized the way it was. But as the celebrations died down, strange reports began to filter in. The first came from the Outer Rim territories, where human traders had been a common sight. Local species reported that human-built space stations were simply empty, with no signs of struggle or forced evacuation. Personal belongings remained in place, meals half-finished in dining halls, but every human had vanished. The hegemony sent investigation teams to former human colonies. What they found made no sense. The settlements looked like their inhabitants had simply walked away in the middle of their daily activities. Gardens were still being watered by automatic systems. Factories continued producing goods that no one would collect. But not a single human remained. More disturbing were the human research facilities. Dr. Lynn Carter had been working on something called dimensional variance studies before the evacuation. Her laboratory on Kepler 442b contained equipment that alien scientists could barely understand, and research notes that seemed to describe impossible things. Her final entry talked about probability cascade theories and mathematical equations that hurt to look at. The economic impact hit quickly. Human technology had become integrated into galactic commerce in ways that no one had fully realized. Humans designed systems differently than other species, with redundancies and adaptive capabilities that seemed inefficient but worked better in practice. Without human maintenance and updates, these systems began to fail. The Confederation's largest shipyard found that their human-designed manufacturing systems would not respond to alien technicians. The repair manuals were written in a way that seemed clear but became confusing when aliens tried to follow them. Attempts to reverse engineer human inventions resulted in explosions and system failures that defied known physics. Captain Rex Sullivan had commanded humanity's deep space exploration vessel, the UES Horizon. His ship had been the farthest human presence from Earth, exploring the regions near Andromeda. The last transmission from the Horizon had been strange, showing what appeared to be a massive construct in empty space, a ring structure the size of a solar system that hummed with energy, that registered on no known sensors. The transmission had cut off abruptly, but not before Sullivan's voice could be heard saying, "My God, they were right. It has been here all along." Now, sitting in the council chamber, Cathvar tried to explain the growing unease that was spreading across the galaxy. Trade routes were disrupted. Alliance agreements that had seemed stable for decades were beginning to crack. The human traders and diplomats had not just been participants in galactic civilization. They had been a kind of glue holding many relationships together. "Where did they go?" asked the Shatai representative. "A species cannot simply vanish from existence." Kethavar looked at the data streaming across his pad. Reports were coming in from the edges of known space. Scout ships reported strange signals and impossible structures. Navigation systems were malfunctioning in ways that suggested space itself was becoming unstable in certain regions. "I do not know where they went," Kethavar admitted. "But I fear we will find out soon. And when we do, I suspect we will wish we had treated them better while they were here." The Great Hall fell silent as the representatives considered this. For the first time in galactic history, a species had simply chosen to leave, and their departure was already causing ripples that no one had anticipated. In the darkness between stars, something was stirring, and the galaxy was beginning to realize that humanity's departure might not have been an escape, but a preparation for something much larger. The final battle lasted 17 minutes and changed the fundamental nature of reality across 3 galactic clusters. General Dan Cooper stood at the command center of humanity's flagship, the UES Prometheus Rising, a vessel that existed simultaneously in multiple universes and could reach into dimensions that had no names in any language. Around him, the combined fleets of civilizations that had been thought extinct for millions of years moved in perfect harmony. The Veil Dancers of Andromeda commanded ships made of crystallized thought that could phase between existing and not existing. The Crystal Singers weaponized harmony itself, their voices reshaping matter at the quantum level while their ships rode on waves of pure music. The Iron Shepherds, cybernetic beings older than the galaxy itself, brought weapons that could edit the past and rewrite the future. Their vessels looked like geometric impossibilities, existing in too many dimensions at once while carrying technologies that treated time as just another direction to move through. But the enemy they faced was beyond anything that normal minds could comprehend. The Whispers had been revealed as servants of entities that existed in the spaces between realities, beings that fed on entire universes by slowly consuming the consciousness within them. These creatures had refined their feeding process over billions of years, using corrupted civilizations as processing systems to convert living minds into pure energy. Admiral Sarah Thompson coordinated the assault from her position outside normal space-time. Her consciousness expanded to perceive the battle across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Her tactical displays showed not just the physical conflict, but the war being fought in realms of pure thought and possibility. "Enemy entities are attempting to collapse local reality into a feeding configuration," she reported to the human fleet. "All units activate reality stabilization fields and prepare for dimensional incursion." The enemy's true form was finally revealed as the battle began. Vast structures that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that had no physical laws appeared throughout the galaxy. These were not ships or stations, but living processing centers where the accumulated consciousness of billions of consumed civilizations was being digested and converted into something else entirely. The entities themselves were harder to perceive directly. They existed as patterns of hunger and manipulation, that could only be understood by minds that had learned to think in concepts that normal physics could not contain. When they did manifest in normal space, they appeared as geometric forms that hurt to look at, shapes that existed in too many dimensions and cast shadows that moved independently of their sources. They are trying to rewrite the basic laws of physics in this region, reported Dr. Sam Rodriguez from her position aboard the reality engineering vessel UES Infinite Possibility. If they succeed, all matter in a 1,000 light-year radius will be converted into processing substrate for their feeding systems. The battle's turning point came when Dr. Pete Morgan activated humanity's ultimate weapon, but it was not a device of destruction. The reality anchor was a creation tool, built from the combined knowledge of every extinct civilization that humanity had rescued from the entity's processing systems. It began to stabilize the fundamental laws of physics across the entire galaxy, making it impossible for the entities to manipulate reality to serve their purposes. Where the anchor's influence spread, the enemy constructs began to malfunction. Their ability to exist partially outside normal space was disrupted, forcing them to manifest completely in dimensions where human weapons could reach them. The Whispers, suddenly cut off from their master's dimensional manipulation abilities, collapsed into confusion as their artificial unity dissolved. The corrupted fleets that had been attacking their own worlds suddenly stopped, their crews blinking in bewilderment as they regained control of their own minds. Across the galaxy, beings who had been manipulated for centuries felt the weight of alien influence lift from their thoughts for the first time in their lives. But the victory was not without cost. Captain Amy Foster, serving as humanity's first galactic coordinator, watched from the bridge of her command ship as entire star systems that had been too deeply corrupted had to be quarantined in pocket dimensions, where they could exist without threatening the restored reality around them. Some damage cannot be undone, she reported sadly. These civilizations chose to merge so completely with the entities that separating them would destroy them entirely. We can only ensure that their choice does not harm others. The aftermath of the battle revealed the true scope of what had been at stake. The entities had been feeding on the galaxy for millions of years, slowly converting advanced civilizations into processing nodes for a vast hunger that existed across multiple universes. Every major war, every extinction event, every mysterious collapse had been part of this feeding process. President Lisa Grant addressed the survivors from the rebuilt council chambers on Nexus Prime. Behind her stood representatives of civilizations that had been thought lost forever, their peoples restored from the quantum patterns that had been preserved in humanity's reality engineering systems. "The galaxy is free," she declared, her words reaching every inhabited world simultaneously. "But freedom requires vigilance. We offer not dominion, but partnership, not rule, but guidance. The age of hidden masters is over. From now on, the only authority you need acknowledge is your own." The new order that emerged was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Humanity established the Guardian Network, a system of reality stabilizers that prevented any future manipulation of civilized space. The technology was shared freely with all species, along with the knowledge of how to detect and resist mental manipulation. Some civilizations chose to join humanity's expanding alliance, eager to learn the technologies that could defend against threats that operated beyond normal physics. Others preferred independence, which humanity respected absolutely. The humans had not fought to become rulers, but to ensure that every being in the galaxy could choose their own path, without interference from hidden manipulators. A few species, those that had been too deeply corrupted by the entity's influence, were relocated to pocket dimensions where they could continue to exist according to their altered nature, without threatening others. These quarantine realms were not prisons, but specialized environments where beings that had been changed beyond normal existence could live according to their new natures. Commander Rick Powell filed the final report on the Liberation Campaign, a document that would become the historical record of how the galaxy had been freed from millions of years of subtle slavery. "We did not conquer the galaxy," he wrote. "We did not need to. We simply showed the other species what they could become when no one was pulling their strings." The transformation that followed was remarkable. Species that had warred for millennia discovered that their conflicts had been artificially manufactured, their natural aggression amplified and directed by the whispers. Without this manipulation, they found that cooperation came more naturally than conquest. The Vorthak hegemony, freed from the influence that had driven their expansion wars, became peaceful traders and explorers. The Shatai, no longer compelled to calculate probabilities for destruction, began using their abilities to model beneficial outcomes and help other species plan for positive futures. The Zilonian Empire transformed into a confederation of independent worlds, their natural telepathic abilities now used to facilitate communication and understanding, rather than control and manipulation. Even the insectoid Kriktar hive, once focused solely on expansion and resource consumption, began creating art and music that celebrated the diversity of galactic life. Dr. Kate Morgan established the Institute for Conscious Choice, a center where beings from across the galaxy could learn to recognize and resist any future attempts at mental manipulation. The Institute's first principle was simple: every conscious being had the right to think their own thoughts and make their own decisions, free from external influence. The human ships that had fought in the final battle remained stationed throughout the galaxy, but not as an occupying force. They served as mobile reality stabilization platforms, ensuring that the laws of physics remained consistent and preventing any future entities from using dimensional manipulation to establish feeding grounds. Captain John Hayes, now serving as Director of Reality Security, established protocols for monitoring the spaces between dimensions where similar entities might still exist. The threat we faced was not unique, he warned the galactic community. There are other hunters in the vast darkness between realities, and some of them are still learning about what happened here. But for the first time in millions of years, the galaxy was truly free. The age of hidden manipulation was over, replaced by an age of conscious cooperation. Species that had been enemies discovered they could be friends. Civilizations that had been stagnant began to grow and explore again. Art and music flourished as beings rediscovered the joy of creating for its own sake, rather than to serve hidden masters. The title of the story had proved prophetic in ways that no one had expected. When humans departed, the universe had indeed shaken, but not in fear of their return.